All right, so as it turns out, we're not just factoring because it's super fun. There are very specific uses in math for us to factor, and one of those uses is solving polynomial equations. So our essential question for today is, how can I solve these polynomial equations? So we're going to go through 3 examples, and I'm going to show you some pretty specific steps because we're getting into some advanced equations. Take a look at this example. Notice that in this equation, we have an x squared. We also have an x. And this is very interesting. So normally when I do an equation, I'm trying to do some steps and get x by itself. But how am I supposed to get x by itself if there's a square and a non-square term? Let's try some things. When I was your age, what I would have tried to do is I would have tried to subtract 3x. And then I know that the square root is the opposite of a square, so maybe I would square root both sides. So like square root of 18 minus 3x, maybe. But this makes no sense because even though I've isolated x here, there's still an x on this side of the equation. That's no answer. But what else am I supposed to do? I could try dividing by x. That might help. So let's try to do something like that. If I divide through by x, look, it would cancel an x here. It would leave me x squared over x. We know is just x. But I would also have to divide the other side by x. And now I have the same issue. Even if I subtracted 3 from both sides, I'd still have x equals 18 over x minus 3. So the point is, we can't just use normal equation solving techniques. They're not going to work. We actually need to learn a new technique. And we just kind of have to go with the flow on this. You'll see why it works, but I'm just telling you, this is like a totally new way of solving equations that we've never seen before. And as it turns out, factoring's involved. There are some pretty specific steps. First of all, you want to get a 0 on one side of your equation, and we'll see why in a second. But your first step, you want to get a 0. Probably the easiest thing to do would be to subtract 18 from both sides. So I have x squared plus 3x minus 18 equals 0. Great. So I'm just doing some stuff. Just bear with me. You'll see why it's a payoff. My second step is going to be to factor, all right? So I still have an equals 0 on the right-hand side, but I'm going to try to factor this guy. So remember, I'm seeing what numbers add to 3 and multiply to negative 18. So many of you just kind of do this in your head, and you're getting good at it. I think it's really helpful to systematically list out the different ways of multiplying to 18, like 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6, because I can very easily see when I make one of these negative, this is definitely the winning option. And remember, the reason I'm making one of them negative is because I need to be multiplying to negative 18. Okay, so x minus 3, x plus 6. If we FOIL this out, x squared, good, negative 18, good. I have negative 3x plus 6x. Yes, that's the 3x in the middle. Okay, so I factored. Now, here's where we're going to do something that is really, really cool. We're going to use this thing. This is a new thing called the zero product property. Zero product property. Okay, here's what it relies on. If I have 0 times anything, it's going to equal what? Okay, so like 0 times 1, well, that's 0. What if I had 0 times 3? Well, that's still 0. What if I had 0 times 6? Well, that's still 0. What if I had 0 times negative 3? Again, still 0. Take a look at how this fact is going to help us. In my equation right now, I have something times something else, and it's equaling 0. So let's think about this. Let's say I can get this first factor to equal 0. Isn't it true that if this first factor equals 0, 0 times whatever the second factor equals is going to equal 0, and I've made my equation true? So what I can do is I can say, hey, if just x minus 3 equals 0, then I have a winning option. So let's just add 3 to both sides. X could equal 3. And let's see why this works. If I plug 3 into this equation, let's see, 3 minus 3. Oh, not 3 equals 3, though it does. 3 minus 3, that equals 0. Let's see what happens when I plug into this factor. I have 3 plus 6, that equals 9. But the point is 0 times 9, does that equal 0? Yes, it does. So this is a solution. But there's actually another solution, because just like if this can equal 0, also if I get this parenthesis to equal 0, I'm also good. So I could also say that x plus 6 could equal 0. And if I subtract 6 from both sides, x would equal negative 6. Again, let's see what happens if we plug in negative 6. If I put a negative 6 in here, negative 6 minus 3 is negative 9. Times, if I put a negative 6 in here, negative 6 plus 6 is 0. Does this equal 0? Well, yeah, it does. So both of these options work, and the reason they work is because of the zero product property. So maybe for our first time ever, I actually have two different possible answers. Pretty cool. Let's do another example. Okay, polynomial equation, because I have my x squared term. So first step, I need to get the 0. Probably it would be easiest to add 23 to the other side, and it doesn't combine with any like terms over here, right? So let's just make sure to write the polynomial in standard form. The 23x does not combine with any terms on that side. Okay, so second step, I know I need to factor now that I have the 0. The winning combination here is going to be 22 and 1. 22 times 1 is 22. 22 plus 1 is 23. Nice. Okay, so this is still equal to 0, which means that in the third step, since I have something times something equaling 0, I can use the zero product property. So remember, that allows me to say, hey, as long as this first parenthesis is equal to 0, I have a winning answer, because 0 times anything equals 0. So in this case, subtracting 22, I would get x equals negative 22. That's a winning option. But also, if this second parenthesis equals 0, I also have a winning option. So if I subtract 1, x could equal negative 1, and these both work. And again, it's because when I plug them in, I will get a 0 in one of these parentheses if I plug in the negative 22, and 0 times anything equals 0. One last example. Okay, so there's a common mistake with this, and that is this. This problem, because I don't have 3 terms, because I only have 2 terms, it's very tempting to simply divide through by x. That would leave you with 6x equals 3, and so you could divide by 6 and say that x equals 3 over 6 reduces to 1/2. And this is a true answer. That's true, totally. Like, that is one of my answers. But remember, for these other problems, typically I got 2 answers. Here I'm only getting 1 answer. And so if I do the problem this way, I'm actually losing another answer that I could have. So we're going to go through the steps. Even though that's a fine way of doing it, I lose an answer. So let's go through the steps. First of all, get a 0. I'll subtract 3x from both sides. Again, no like terms, so 6x squared minus 3x equals, these cancel, I'll get 0. Second, I need to factor. And this is not the sort of factoring that I was doing in example 2. Example 2 was a reverse FOIL situation. But since I only have 2 terms here, this is definitely going to be a GCF factoring situation. So what's the GCF here? I think it is 3x. When I pull out a 3x, I'm left with 2x minus, remember, when I divide 3x out of 3x, it is 1. So pulling out the GCF, there's my factoring, and it's still equal to 0. Now I have something times something else. So final step, I'm going to use the zero product property. Either 3x is equal to 0, or also 2x minus 1 could be equal to 0. This first one is simple to solve. 0 divided by 3 is 0. Also, if I add 1, I'd get 2x equals 1. And then divide by 2, x equals 1/2. And remember, that was the solution I got at the beginning doing it that other way, but also now we can see that x could also equal 0. And here's the characteristic 2 answers that I'm used to get. Typically for these problems, you will get 2 answers. All right, so I know that this was a crazy new solving technique. We have never done anything like this before. We've never solved equations like this, but if you follow the steps, you'll be fine. So first of all, remember, you're going to start by getting a 0 on one side. Then you're going to factor. The factoring creates multiplication. So because of the multiplication and because of the 0, you can use the zero product property where you say, hey, if I can get either parenthesis equal to 0, it will equal 0. The whole equation will equal 0. And then give yourself a pat on the back because we're starting to touch on some more advanced math. Smile.